All right, who wants to cook like a rock star? As always, we're going to compare the similarities between making food and making music. Today's concept is going to be old school meets new school. This is a concept we can both use in the kitchen when we're cooking and also in the recording studio when we're making music. So we're going to pair a new school cooking technology, really, which is a sous vide machine. And we're going to make a really wonderful Italian beef with a Caprese twist. So the Caprese is sort of the old school, right? It's sort of a rustic cooking technique, not real complicated. Gives it a nice Italian soulful little edge. And in the music side of things, we're going to do I guess what we would call it the musical technology equivalent of a sous vide machine, which is we're going to be tracking with loops. So both of these technologies, the sous vide and looping in music, really allow us to create a precision that could not be done by a human being. Right, so in the sous vide side, what we're going to wind up with is a medium rare chuck roast. I know, that sounds like a terrible idea. It's fantastic. It has about the same texture and consistency. It's going to be very, very similar to a prime rib. On the musical side, using loops, we're able to create a consistency that is hypnotic and very moody. So we're going to create a soundtrack piece for that. So what do we need to do this? Well, we need a chuck roast. So I've got one right here. I buy a quarter steer twice a year, so I've always got beef when I need it. We're going to put this on some sourdough. So I baked some sourdough this morning. And we're going to put together a Caprese salad. So we need Campari tomatoes. Got those right here. We need some fresh basil. And we need olive oil, vinegar. I'm also going to use a Chicago seasoning on our meat. And instead of traditional capers, I like to use chive capers. These are basically the buds from my chive plants in this spice garden. When the plants start to bud, I take the buds off and I put them in a vinegar brine, which is how capers are made. Capers are really just a bud of a flower. We're just using chives. All right, so let's get started with what we need to do with our beef. Just going to take this out of the package. Okay, so the first thing we're going to need to do is season our beef. So I'm just going to use some kosher salt, and I'm going to use a fair amount because we want to season this beef all around. Keep the towel sticking. So I'm just going to rub that in, and we'll get a nice kosher salt seasoning on that. Next thing I'm going to want to do is add the seasoning that I want to use to flavor the meat, which is the Chicago steak seasoning. That's this guy right here, and you can get this at most places where you would get your spices, and I'm going to put a liberal amount on there and rub it in on all sides. All right, so now that the beef is all seasoned, I kind of pat that in there and treat it like a rub. And then we're going to put this beef in a bag, and then we're going to give it the sous vide treatment. So sous vide is a French term, and it means under vacuum. So what it really is a very consistent water bath. It's consistent in water temperature, and the water will move around the meat at a consistent rate so that it stays, in our case, 131 degrees for 26 hours. So we need to put our beef in a bag. We do not need to create a perfect vacuum to do this. In fact, I do not. So what I like to do is use a submersion technique. So I'm going to take the bag, leaving it open, and I'm going to submerge it into our water. This is just a standard stock pot filled pretty close to the top with water. And as the meat sinks in, you can see the air is leaving this bag. It's not going to be a perfect vacuum, but I don't need a perfect vacuum. Just need it so that the meat will sink and stay submerged. Once it has done that, I'm going to seal up the bag, and I'll just clip it to the side, making sure that the meat is completely submerged in the water, and then we turn on our technology, our sous vide machine. So I'm going to go ahead and change the temperature of this to 131 degrees, and I'm going to set my time for 26 hours. That's right, 26 hours at 131 degrees will give us a perfect medium rare chuck roast that is as tender and delicious as prime rib. The only thing we really have to be aware of as we're cooking for this period of time is that the water will evaporate from the heat. So maybe 3-4 times throughout this cook, we'll just want to come and top off the water to make sure that that meat stays submerged. And that is all we have to do for part 1. All right, so our roast is out of the sous vide water bath, and we are ready to give it the next treatment, which is we're going to take the roast and put it on a plate and put it in the fridge. We're going to put it in the fridge uncovered because we want it to dry out just a little bit so the surface gets tacky, so we can go ahead and give it a good hard sear. So, out of the bag, onto a plate. I'm going to set it up on its side like this, and then we're going to pop it in the fridge for about 45 minutes. That'll allow it to get tacky, but still keep it about room temperature inside, which is perfect for serving. All right, so while our roast is drying in the refrigerator, let's make our caprese salad. So we need some tomatoes. So I love Campari tomatoes. They are the most flavorful tomatoes that I can find. So we're going to chop up some tomatoes. That's step 1. Slice those up a little bit. Really tasty tomatoes. Much better than your typical supermarket tomato. Tastes very similar to tomatoes that you would grow in your garden. We all know those are better. All right, tomatoes all chopped. Let's get those in the bowl. Next step, mozzarella cheese. So now, whenever possible, I like to use fresh mozzarella cheese, but it's not always possible. So I'm going to use these mozzarella balls. That saves me the trouble of having to cut them up and dice them into little cheese chunks. This is where I'm going to go ahead and add the chive capers that I made. Just like regular capers, but they're made with chive. Get those in the bowl. Lovely. Now we need some fresh basil. So I've got a mix of regular basil and then some black basil, purple basil, that I like to use as well. All right, now we need a dash of olive oil, extra virgin olive oil, and some balsamic. Just a splash of that. Because we're going to be adding this on top of our Italian beef sandwich, it's all right if this is a little wetter than you would typically make a salad. Let's give that a quick mix. Lovely. Looking good. All right, so now that we have had it in the fridge just long enough for it to get tacky, I'm going to go ahead and get ready to sear it in the pan. So I've got some avocado oil that I'm adding to my cast iron skillet. Let that coat and get up to temperature. I'm going to do this on a medium-high heat. I want to sear this pretty hard. one of the things that happens when you cook sous vide is it's going to be cooked perfectly, but it's not going to have a sear at all because it was cooked in a water bath. So once I get that oil up to temp, I'm going to take the roast, now that it's nice and tacky. If it was too wet, if we just pulled it right out of the bag without letting it dry, we wouldn't be able to get a hard sear. So now it's nice and tacky. Wait for my temperature to come up. Getting there. Just want to see a little smoke on that avocado oil. And then we're going to go ahead and sear this on all sides for maybe 1.5 minutes. So let's go ahead and get started. There's the sound. You always have to hear that sound. Now let's go ahead and give this a flip. Onto yet another side. You can see we've got a pretty good sear on the top. This is really the ultimate reverse sear is what we're doing. We have the meat cooked perfectly to medium rare. It's going to be super tender, which is really hard to do with a chuck roast to get it tender at medium rare, but that's what sous vide will bring. All right, so now that our beef is done with the sear, I'm going to go ahead and slice. So I want to try and slice this as thin as I can. And we're going to stack this on top of our sourdough bread. So as you can see, that is medium rare, which normally with a chuck roast, medium rare would be almost you'd be unable to chew it. That is beautiful. Pretty much exactly like prime rib. All right, now let's go ahead. We'll move this off to the side and let's get ready to plate. So, sourdough. Some freshly baked sourdough that I'm going to go ahead and slice up. I'm going to cut off the end piece and save that for a crostini or something like that, but this is the piece that I'm really after. Go ahead and slice through that. Now let's pop that on the plate. Now before I add the beef, I saved some of the au jus from the sous vide bag, and I'm going to soak the bread. It's sort of like they do in Chicago when they dip the sandwich in the au jus. So I'm just going to soften that bread up with a little bit of the au jus, soak that all over, and let's lay our medium rare chuck roast right on top of that. Let's top this with a little bit of our Caprese salad. And for the final step, I want to add a little bit of the giardiera that I made specifically for this purpose. I'll probably do another video at some point on how I make my giardiera. But let's add that. Oh, lovely. And I'm going to pop a whole pepperoncini right on top. Oh, this looks so good. So there you have it, Chicago-style Italian beef with a Caprese twist. Old school meets new school, just like our soundtrack music, old school meets new school, cooking like a rock star. So over on the music side of the house, we're going to be using GarageBand to put together some loops. And then we're going to put some primal slide guitar over the top, mixing our old school guitar with our new school technology to create that precision hypnotic soundtrack.